Welcome back. We finally got you through the first day of the class, and now we finally get into some real educational material for our course. Once again, I'm Professor Nicholas Sterling, and I'm very glad to have you here for Greek Myth and Tragedy. In this course, as we talked about in the previous videos, we're going to be reading plays by all three of the major tragic playwrights from ancient Athens. And those are Aeschylus, the one that we are talking about today, Sophocles, and Euripides, the other two playwrights that you will be reading later in the course. One feature of this course is that we set aside some time to talk about each of the three playwrights individually. And if you've been to Sakai under Resources, you will notice that there are three handouts, numbers 1, 2, 3, that discuss those playwrights in some detail. Even though there is quite a bit more information there than you actually need for an exam, for instance, it's still worth going over the three handouts, the material that's there, so that you do understand who these three are, and especially be certain that you can relate these three playwrights to the time period from Athens in which these are to be found. So please make sure that you do review these three handouts. Now, at the moment, I would like you to pause your video and go to Sakai, and please obtain the handout number 1. Please make sure that you have it open as you go through this video, because some of the information that is there will be related to in the video that I'm discussing, and I would like to make sure that you have it available. So please pause your video, go to Sakai, and open handout number 1. Are you all set? Excellent. It's now time for us to talk about the first of our three playwrights, Aeschylus. So first of all, as I'm going to talk about in the next video, the period of the production of ancient Greek tragedy, especially at Athens, is dated approximately to the mid-6th century or 500s BC, and the plays that we have surviving date from the early 400s BC down to the end of the 5th century BC, the end of the 400s BC. So for the standpoint of the period of the plays that you'll be reading, you should think of this as encompassing principally the 5th century BC. All the plays that you'll be reading do in fact come from the 5th century BC and all come from Athens, the major city in the midsection of Greece that, of course, is today the capital, as you well know. So even though you'll notice that Aeschylus' birth date is back in the 500s BC, you should realize that his own career didn't really get started as a playwright until he was already into his 50s, in fact. His first dated play is 472 BC, which is quite a bit later. So again, remember that ancient tragedy is really a product, from our standpoint, of the ancient 5th century BC, the 400s BC. All right, with that introduction, let's now speak about Aeschylus. Please get out your handout so that you can follow along. First of all, the major piece of information about Aeschylus is that although we know him today as the tragic playwright, he himself was less proud of his career as a playwright and far more so of his career as a soldier and navyman serving on behalf of Athens. Aeschylus himself was born in 525 BC. We happen to have that date fairly secure because there exists a piece of marble slab that survives to us from the ancient island of Paros. It's called the Marmor Parium, or the Parian marble, and it lists a whole group of dates that relate in many cases to events in mythology and also to dates of major leaders and such. And so we are fortunate in the case of Aeschylus that his name is included in this list, and his date is given to us as 525 BC. We don't actually trust all the dates that are on that piece of stone, but fortunately 525 BC works for us because it means that he would probably have been writing his plays approximately when he was in his 20s to 30s initially, and then of course in later years as he got developed. And typically around age 30 is when men in ancient Athens began working seriously in some type of career. So therefore, the date 525 BC is satisfactory for us. As mentioned, it's really his career as a navyman on behalf of Athens, serving in the Athenian fleet, and also as a soldier serving in the Athenian army, in which he distinguishes himself. So we're going to talk later about the Persian Wars, which is when the Persians from the east came over and invaded into Greece twice. If you've seen the movie 300, I'm quite certain that you will remember the figure of Xerxes. He's a rather wild figure, isn't he? Xerxes was the second of the two Persian invaders. He was the son of the first, whose name was Darius. The Persian Wars, as I say, we'll talk about later, but both of them, both of the individual campaigns, involved conflict directly with the city of Athens. So two dates that stick out are 490 BC, which was the Battle of Marathon, and 480 BC, the one that is described in 300, which is the Battle of Salamis. It was the same year as the actual battle described in the movie, which was the Battle of Thermopylae a few months before up north. So in those two campaigns, Aeschylus served, definitely at Marathon and very likely at Salamis. He certainly witnessed the battle if he did not actually serve in it. And Aeschylus himself had included on his epitaph after his death that he had in fact served at Marathon on behalf of the city of Athens. And as we mentioned, it was this success of his that he was really most proud of and wanted to be remembered for by his Athenian countrymen. So we have those 2 points that he served in both of these battles. Beyond that, we don't have too much other information about Aeschylus, although we do know that he must have been a fairly good friend of the later leader of Athens named Pericles. You will be hearing a lot about him in later lectures, because the first play, Persians, that you are reading for this course, also the first play that we have surviving, was actually produced by Pericles in order to commemorate the Athenian victory over the Persians, as you will see when you get to that play. So Aeschylus did not actually produce that play himself, maybe because, possibly because of his own youth, but also potentially because that particular play had a special event to commemorate, and Pericles took advantage of the opportunity to make a name for himself by producing that particular play. And it is indeed generally true that playwrights did not always have to produce the plays on their own behalf. Okay, so once Aeschylus finished his career in the military, he devoted himself to the writing of plays, and apparently had at least 2 sons and 1 nephew who also continued on the dynasty of being playwrights. Apparently, near the end of his life, in the early 450s BC, he emigrated over to Sicily. There were several cities, such as Gela and Syracuse in Sicily, that were also very interested in the dramatic arts, especially the tyrant named Hiero, H-I-E-R-O, at Syracuse. And so Aeschylus appears to have gone over and worked over there, and apparently he passed away there in 456 BC. We have the famous odd story that Aeschylus was out sunning himself, and apparently he was bald, and along came an eagle with a tortoise that he wanted to break open, and apparently dropped it right on top of Aeschylus's bald head in order to crack open the tortoise. That story is not trusted, but it is the rather amusing anecdote of exactly how Aeschylus passed away. In any event, he did pass away in 456 BC, and that was actually 2 years after the production of his final known series of plays, the trilogy that is referred to as Oresteia. Be mindful that Oresteia is the name of the entire trilogy, and that there are 3 plays in the trilogy. Those are Agamemnon, Libation Bearers, and Eumenides, which are the 3 individual plays that comprise that trilogy. And as we'll talk about in the video regarding the production of tragedy, tragic playwrights typically did produce their plays in groups of 3, plus another additional play referred to as a satyr, S-A-T-Y-R, satyr play. So although we have only individual plays surviving, except for this trilogy, these plays would originally have been produced in a group of 3, and in all the other cases, when we have a play surviving, we've lost the other 2 plays that those go with. So Oresteia was produced in 458 BC, and Aeschylus himself passed away 2 years later in 456 BC. Now, I'd like you to take a look at your handout, please, and please take a look at the bottom of page 1. Look through section D, where it lists the tetralogies, the 3 tragedies produced together with a satyr play. I will tell you which plays in this list are the surviving ones. You can underline them if you'd like. And number 1, Persians, the one that you're now reading. Number 2, Oresteia, we just discussed, the trilogy, which is coming up very soon. Number 3, the other play you're reading, 7 Against Thebes. And number 4, Suppliants, a play we're not actually reading in this course. And then on the next play, the next page, we have Prometheus Bound on page 2, number 13 at the top, Prometheus Bound. That is a play that is thought maybe not to have been Aeschylus's original work. It may really have been the work of one of his sons, and may have been misattributed to him by later literary compilers. But since we don't know for sure exactly who did write it, and since we know that there was a tradition of maintaining groups of 7 trilogies, apparently, 7 plays from these tragic playwrights, it's indeed possible that Prometheus Bound was chosen and thought to be one of Aeschylus's plays. Okay, so on page 3 are your 7 surviving plays, the ones that I just mentioned a moment ago on the 2 previous pages. And again, the ones that you're reading in this class are number 1, Persians, number 2, 7 Against Thebes, and then the trilogy that's listed in number 4, Agamemnon, Coryphoroi, and Eumenides. And again, that's the last production that we know of by Aeschylus, definitely the last one that he produced at Athens before he emigrated over to Sicily. Now, those are the works we have surviving, and as I mentioned, there's a reason why there are only 7, and that is that later literary compilers went through Aeschylus's works and ended up discarding a lot of plays that they considered to be of subpoor quality, and they kept only 7 of his. So in fact, there is a specific reason why we only have these particular 7 plays surviving. As is often the case with ancient Greek and Roman work, we're really fortunate that we have this many. We could easily have had more, but of course we lost the famous library at Alexandria to a fire, and so therefore we don't have as many plays surviving as of course we would have liked. But we do have the 7 anyway that have made it. Now, Aeschylus used a variety of different meters, and he liked to construct the plots to be very slow-moving, with the drama building up very, very slowly until finally reaching its climax at the very end. So these plays, as you'll see, move along at a fairly deliberate pace. The chorus has a lot to say in these plays, as you will notice, and the characters tend to speak individually on their own, but not always doing really all that much on stage besides just conversing. A lot more is focused by the playwright on the general concept of the tragedy, rather than any specific action that is carried out from the tragedy itself as it's occurring. And in fact, many times in Aeschylus's plays, the tragedy itself is considered to have already occurred even before the characters actually arrive on stage. So therefore, we're really seeing the outcome of the tragedy as opposed to the actual tragedy when we're watching an Aeschylus play. That's quite different from what will happen later with Sophocles and Euripides. So you'll be able to see this easily in these plays, and take note of the fact that the characters really cannot do anything to prevent the tragedy that's occurring by the time they show up on the stage in these plays. So the meters, as we said, are used to heighten the dramatic effect. And much of what we see in the plays is simply commentary on a general tragic situation. Obviously, there is going to be action. So in the case of Persians, we have the appearance of the ghost of Darius after the sacrifice of Queen Atossa. Then we see the arrival home of the son Xerxes, who has been devastated in the loss of the Battle of Salamis. In Seven Against Thebes, it gets a little more active than that. We hear about the contest between the two sons of Oedipus, Eteocles and Polynices. You will see that when you read the play. And then we get a little more so with Oresteia, which is a much later trilogy by Aeschylus. And in that one, we actually do get to witness, again, not on stage, but we do get to witness the murder of Agamemnon, as well as Cassandra. Then the vengeance played out against the wife Clytemnestra, the mother of Orestes. The vengeance is carried out by Orestes, and that's why this is called Oresteia, because he's actually the central character of the whole trilogy. And then we see the trial of Orestes in the third play, Eumenides. Eumenides is the later name for the Furies, who are the avenging deities from hell, who want to punish Orestes for killing his mother, Clytemnestra. So again, although there is some action on stage, but much of it is more speech devoted, it's more commentary devoted, and the meters are used in order to build up all of that action. Aeschylus does not tend to rely a lot on props on stage. Instead, he will have this raised mound that appears in the middle of the stage, and that is usually a central focal point for the action. So for instance, in Persians, as you'll see, there is a tomb for King Darius of Persia. That's the one at which Darius' wife will sacrifice in order to call up his ghost. In the Seven Against Thebes, it's the Cadmea, which is the Acropolis of the city of Thebes, where all the action is happening. And then in the Oresteia, it will be the tomb of King Agamemnon, appropriately, where Electra, the daughter, will come out to sacrifice, and that will actually be where she'll meet her exiled brother Orestes in that play. So that tends to be used instead of props. The use of props comes up more in Sophocles and Euripides' plays. Now, a concept that was developed by ancient commentators was the three styles of tragedy referred to as high, medium, and low. High style, which is what we have here with Aeschylus, means that the action is focused principally on the gods or on heroes and on big, massive, epic events, the kinds of stories that would also appear in epic poetry, like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, for instance. So with this, since the focus is on gods and heroes, typically humans are really diminutive in status in comparison to the gods, and the humans can't really do very much to get out of their fate. Whatever has occurred in the tragedy, the humans are not really capable of getting themselves out of it. It's already been predetermined. Fate has come along to say, this is what's supposed to happen. There's nothing to change it. So the tragedy is typically the playing out of whatever the gods and fate have predetermined. Again, this will not be the same as what you'll see later with Sophocles and Euripides, because in those plays, the humans have a much greater role to play as to determining how a specific tragedy is going to play itself out. Again, you will see that later when you read those plays. Okay, so here are the plays that you are, in fact, reading in the class. The first one, Persians, we'll talk about a little in more detail later. Persians is the play that identifies the Battle of Salamis as being the key moment when the Persians are vanquished by the Greeks and see their growing power curtailed east of the Hellespont, your direction, Hellespont. The Persians, as we said before, tried twice to invade Greece, and they were rebuffed twice by the Athenians at Marathon and then again at Salamis, 490 and 480 BC. So this is the second rebuff that has been suffered by the current king of Persia, Xerxes. This play was actually given special permission, and it's the only play that surviving that discusses a contemporary event as opposed to a mythological event, as you will see the case with all the other plays that you will read in this class. So Persians is a perspective from the Athenian side on what happened to the Persians. So the viewpoint is from the Persians, but the Athenians get to see how the tragedy plays out, the consequences that it has on the Persian Empire. So we'll discuss that in more detail. Seven Against Thebes is the play that is first the run-up to the conflict between Eteocles, king of Thebes, and his brother Polynices, who has been denied his position of kingship that he was in fact entitled to by their original agreement. So Polynices is coming in attacking. He has 6 other generals with him, and these 7 allies are surrounding the 7 gates of Thebes. And Eteocles has 6 of his own fellow heroes who will oppose those 7 together in a big battle. In this battle, Thebes survives, the populace is saved, but Eteocles and Polynices die in their mutually in their duel. And so this play carries out Eteocles' role as leader of Thebes, and then at the end you will see the conflict between the 2 sisters, Antigone and Ismene, as to what's supposed to happen with the body of Polynices. He, of course, was their brother. They are supposed to give him a proper burial, but the state of Thebes has commanded that he, in fact, will not be given a proper burial because of his role in treasonously attacking his own city. So that concludes 7 Against Thebes, as you will see. And Aristeia is the trilogy that tracks the unhappy life of Orestes. First, he sees his mother, Clytemnestra, murder his father, Agamemnon, when he arrives home from the triumph over Troy, as well as Agamemnon's concubine, Cassandra, who was given to him as a war prize from Troy. Once those 2 are murdered, Clytemnestra teams up with Agamemnon's cousin Aegisthus, who was himself a bastard member of the House of Atreus. The 2 of them are in fact lovers by this point, and they rule the city of it's actually Argos in the play, although originally it would have been Mycenae, the ancient city that was very close to the site of what later was known as Argos. So they rule together. And eventually, however, Orestes sneaks back into the country from exile with the help of his friend Pylades. The 2 of them team up with Orestes' sister Electra to dispatch the 2 of them, because Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. But then Clytemnestra's Furies come up from the underworld in order to play out vengeance against Orestes. They appear only to him, and they drive him mad. And in fact, Orestes was often synonymous in common Greek parlance with insanity, because he was being driven mad by the Furies as vengeance. So Orestes flees to Delphi in order to get protection from the god Apollo, and he is given purification at the oracle for the act of bloodshed that he's carried out. However, the Furies still want family vengeance against him, and the only way to deal with that is to get Orestes over to Athens. So Athena brings him over there with the help of Apollo, and they set up the first ever jury trial that will eventually become a mainstay of Athenian politics, as again we'll talk about in a later video. And so Orestes is put on trial and is acquitted, and the Furies, who are again these ancient blood goddesses of vengeance, are established as the new guardian goddesses at Athens with the help of Athena, and they come to be known as Eumenides, which is a Greek for goddesses with great graciousness, they who use their strength for good purposes. And so that conversion saves Greece from utter destruction, which is what was about to happen, because they were denied the prize of Orestes, as well as the duty of carrying out their role on behalf of Orestes' mother, Clytemnestra. So those are the plays that you were reading, and we will have future videos in which we will discuss these plays together with your discussion questions about these plays in more detail. All right, so the next video that you're watching is going to be an overview of the production of tragedy, so stay tuned, and we will give you a description of how ancient Greek drama was performed on stage. See you next video.